What is the picture of success? What are the key performance indicators, or how you measure diversity and inclusion policies?
Yeah, that is the question of the day, right? And I've had the absolute pleasure of doing this work for over a decade now. And I can say that in that past decade, your question is the consistent question, right? That's work that we're all doing, we're all figuring out, and that companies take different approaches on, right? Because what's going to be valuable to measure in one company is not necessarily what's going to be the same for another, right? So companies might look at representation, right? So, for example, how many women are in a senior leadership team? How many people of color are at a senior leadership team? If we look at leadership, what is the generational breakdown, right? You could look at the different levels within an organization and look at the movement patterns, either up a corporate ladder or across, because internal movement, even at a lateral level, is really important, right? It creates opportunities to develop skills in preparation potentially for something bigger, or something higher within a company. But some people don't want to keep moving up in management, right? Some people are interested in continuing to develop their skills in another way. So that's also a piece of measurement that's really important. So representation certainly is one piece. And again, that looks different depending on where you are in the world. So looking locally and saying, okay, who are the people who are underrepresented? Which voices are we missing that we really should have at the table? And that exists even when in some demographics there are some demographics that virtually don't exist, right? So you look at what makes sense locally in terms of underrepresented populations, and then what goals can we create in alliance with that, right? So one that's really common, of course, is representation of women and growth of women within a company. Another is people with disabilities, right? People with disabilities exist and are working or able to be working around the globe and are often underrepresented. And so, how do we create opportunities? But more specifically, where are we creating barriers? And this is true for any company, right? What are the barriers that are created or that exist for people with disabilities? And how can those be removed? Or how can we work around them? How can we guide and support people through that? So that could, if that's an approach, there's also an opportunity there to look at the measurement around engagement of, for example, people with disabilities in mentoring programs, in sponsorship relationships, and then how do they grow and develop with the company. And so growth and development is something that with the right people information systems in place, you can track, right? But the other piece of that is the piece that tends to be more fuzzy, which is how do people feel to show up each day, right? What does that environment feel like for them? Are they able to give their best as an individual with unique skills, talents, perspectives? And that's the piece that's so much harder to wrap our arms around, right?
Okay, so we are talking about effectiveness of the organization, effectiveness of an individual employee. So is it all about business? Is it all about the return on investment? What is the business profit when we talk about diversity and inclusion? Why do you invest a lot of time, a lot of money in diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, the studies show us that there's absolutely a business benefit to it, right? And that businesses that have greater diversity in leadership levels, there's greater return on investment for them, right? They are more likely to see profitability. They're more likely to see growth of their business. They're more likely to see their employees be retained, right? And we know that it's so incredibly expensive to lose employees and find new ones and train new ones, right? Of course, some level of attrition is always appropriate and important, quite frankly, to continue to infuse new ideas and perspectives. But holding on to good folks who have good things to contribute is really important and absolutely contributes to a company's bottom line, right? So diversity contributes to a company's bottom line, in part because of that idea generation, right? When you have more diverse perspectives and then you add in the layer that's more inclusive environments, then you get to take more action on those diverse perspectives, which turns into idea creation, which turns into profits, right? That innovation is where this all leads, right? And so in the end, that supports businesses being even better, right? And being more profitable. And that's really important to shareholders, right? And also, there are a lot of folks for whom they do this because they think this is the right thing to do, because they know what it's like to work in a corporate environment, right? And they know what it's like to feel valued or not valued. And they know that people sort of are better contributors when they feel good about showing up and being able to contribute and being able to be authentic. One of the things that I think is really interesting is that conversation is different around the world, right? The extent to which people want to show up and share of themselves is different around the world. And people want that to greater or lesser degrees depending on local cultural expectations. And so that's been another point of continuous conversation about what is that right fit? What is that right balance locally? And then how do we support that, whatever that is?
Would you agree that a corporate approach to diversity and inclusion creates a kind of bubble over some groups of employees? So, for example, we have the LGBT communities or community of working parents. So they are supported. But this situation, this social groups are treated differently in a real life. So we have the corporate reality, corporate bubble with the pinky rosy world, and we also have the national norms, societal norms that exist in our everyday life. So isn't it a clash of approaches?
Not from what I've seen, actually. So at IGT, we have diversity and inclusion groups, or DIGs, right? Diversity and inclusion groups. And they are, like you mentioned, they're developed around underrepresented dimensions of diversity, right? So, right, we have our LGBT group, we have our women's network, we have a group for people with disabilities, we have our military veterans group, and we have a group of employees who are over the age of 50. And they, first of all, members are created of those groups and people who support them, right? So they're not closed to just the people who identify in that way, right? So the group for employees greater than 50 are members also include people who are younger than 50, right? Who are in their 20s, who are really interested in intergenerational exchange and supporting one another. And so really what's happening is they're coming together and saying, maybe in the outside world, but also within our corporate environment, there's a certain experience that we have. And we want other people to understand that experience, right? So something that I've seen that's pretty common is once people reach a certain age, right, that they feel like people look at them differently. And often in a corporate environment, that means that they don't feel as valued, right? That person who is over the age of 50 is now feeling like people think I'm not so good at technology, or people think I don't want a promotion. They don't think I want to learn and grow. They think I'm just looking at when can I stop working, right? And so these groups come to us, right? And they say, that's just not true, right? And so, how do we have a conversation that's meaningful internally about these assumptions, these stereotypes, and then looking at various policies or processes or cultural elements that reinforce those things? How do we tear those apart, right? How do we have different conversations? How do we create more support? And I don't think that's counter to what's happening externally, right? In fact, a lot of time it gives people voice and helps them feel empowered in a way that positively impacts their life outside of the company, right? Mm-hmm. They feel emboldened to have conversations that they're not having, but they feel that they really need to have. Mm-hmm. And so that support, so many employees have told me, helps them in their whole life create a more authentic and meaningful experience.